Okay, welcome in everybody. Just taking a few moments here as people arrive. And as folks are entering into the Zoom room here, feel free to just write in the chat where you're zooming in from, so we know where we are in this international community. Feel free to write your name, where you're zooming in from, and something that's drawing you to this experience, perhaps something you're hoping to gain from it. Just feel free to share a bit of that in the chat here so we can have a sense of where we're all connecting from. Wow, yeah, seeing people from all corners of the US, as well as Jerusalem, Sydney, Australia. We've got West Coast, East Coast. Got everywhere in between. Wonderful. So as you continue to come in, for those of you who are just arriving, we're welcoming people to write where they're tuning in from, and feel free to share something that's drawing you to this learning opportunity, something you might be hoping to draw or gain from it. And I'll begin introducing, what we're doing here and why we're here. So first and foremost, this is a very auspicious date in the Jewish annual calendar. It's Rosh Chodesh, the new moon of the month of Elul. And this month is seen traditionally as the month of preparation for the high holiday season, which is the renewal of our whole calendar. And so while it is in very many ways the end of one year, it's a really packed and potent time to be preparing for what is yet to emerge and what is yet to come in the new year. I'm just going to share a few words about Shefa and who we are. Shefa is committed to the safe and skillful exploration of expanded states of consciousness rooted in sacred Jewish traditions. We offer psychedelic support through monthly integration meetings. We create educational resources, and we provide experiences that help support and guide people in encountering their own inner experience. One of the major forms of support we provide is in the realm of spiritual support and enrichment, from the vantage point that the Jewish spiritual tradition has been grappling with questions of consciousness and the mysteries of being alive for generations, and that these wisdom traditions can greatly contribute to our own ongoing search in the realms of consciousness, healing, and connection. We're here today for the first of 4 offerings of our Beit Midrash for the Jewish month of Elul. A Beit Midrash is the traditional name for a center of spiritual study, but the literal meaning of Beit Midrash is a house of seeking. The word Midrash or Lidrosh means to seek out. That can involve seeking to make meaning of our experiences or of our sacred texts. It can also involve a search for the divine or spiritual connection. And always, a Beit Midrash is a place where this search takes place in community, together with others who are similarly seeking to connect with our wisdom lineages. In today's session, as well as the next 3 Sundays, we'll be embarking on the journey toward the Jewish high holiday season, guided by Jewish teachings and teachers who can give language and offer frameworks for different modes of experience that we may encounter within the larger context of this potent time of year. And it is my deep pleasure and honor to introduce today's presenter, today's teacher, Dr. Rabbi Arthur Green, or Rabbi Art Green, as he's fondly known. Rabbi Green has been a leading voice of contemporary Jewish spirituality for the last half century and more. He was the founding dean of the Hebrew College Rabbinical School in Massachusetts, was formerly dean and president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, is professor emeritus of Jewish thought at Brandeis University and taught at the University of Pennsylvania. Rabbi Green also founded Chavurat Shalom in 1968, which gave birth to the Chavurah movement in America. Rabbi Green is a historian and a theologian, and his work seeks to form a bridge between these 2 fields. a leading figure of neo-Hasidism in the contemporary Jewish world. Rabbi Green's teachings and writings seek to articulate a contemporary Jewish mysticism based on the Hasidic model. Dr. Rabbi Green has written, edited, and translated over 20 books, including scholarly works on Jewish mysticism and mystics, as well as translations and interpretations of Hasidic teachings, including the text he will be sharing with us later today from The Light of the Eyes by Rabbi Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl. His most recent theological work is Judaism for the World, Reflections on God, Life, and Love. He's also written a commentary on the Hebrew prayer book that will be published in 2022. Rabbi Green, our teacher, we're blessed by your partnership here, by your presence here, and by launching us toward the new year. And without further ado, I'd like to pass the camera, pass the mic over to Dr. Rabbi Art Green. You're muted, so here we go.
Okay. How about that? How about that? Okay, thank you, Ami. Wonderful to be with you all. Wonderful to be with you internationally. Ami's in Jerusalem, I'm in Boston. Some of you are on the West Coast and Australia and all kinds of other interesting places. It's great to be together. And I wish all the people who are participants in Shefa, indeed, some very high holidays coming up. And I hope they indeed take you to new heights and depths in your own spiritual growth. Yes, this is that day. This is the second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, the new month of Elul. I went to shul this morning, to synagogue, and I heard the shofar blown. I somehow was prepared for all the rest, but I had forgotten that was coming, and so it took me by surprise. And it was indeed very powerful to hear the shofar for the first time this year, and to know that it's coming. It's all coming. And so here we are. So I want to start with a biblical verse that's quoted about Rosh Hashanah, but applies to this day too. A verse in the book of Psalms, which reads in Hebrew, Tik'u b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom chagenu. Blow the shofar on the new month, on the new moon. So that sounds like today, but it's really talking about a month from now, which is the new moon of Tishrei. Blow the shofar on the new moon on the hidden holiday, on the day of our festival, which is hidden, b'kesel, l'chasot, kisui. The hidden holiday is hidden. So why is the holiday hidden? Because on Rosh Hashanah, which is also, of course, the first day of the month, we don't celebrate the new moon. We just celebrate Rosh Hashanah as the beginning of the year. We don't take note of the fact that a new moon has been discovered. But this holiday, I'm going to start in the world of religious anthropology, and we're going to get to Hasidism. We're going to go various places along the way, just so you know. This holiday was indeed once very hidden. You know, the Bible, the Torah, seems to not decide when the year begins. The spring month, the month of Passover, is called Chodesh Aviv, the month of spring, and is referred to in the Torah as the first month of the year. This holiday, Rosh Hashanah, is the first day of the 7th month in the Torah. It's midpoint in the year, 7 out of 12 months. It's the midpoint of the year. It's not the beginning of the year. And although this holiday is mentioned twice in the Torah, it is never called Rosh Hashanah. It's never called the beginning of the year. Turns out there was a conflict between these two calendars. The old land of Israel tradition was to begin the new year in the spring. The calendar the Jews got from Babylonia when they went into exile, or maybe even from the influence of Babylonian culture before exile, celebrated the new year in the fall. The rabbis epitomized this by asking, when was the world created? Was the world created in the spring, or was the world created in the fall? Rosh Hashanah celebrates the creation of the world. So which is the right one? When was it really created? But the reason for this conflict is interesting. This fall New Year festival was also a festival of renewing the life of the gods. The gods of Babylon somehow were brought back to life, were recrowned on this festival. The assertion of the power of the gods was renewed. And there were all kinds of rites associated with that, which the prophets, who were kind of Puritan types, did not like very much and were opposed to and tried to suppress. So this is a holiday that was at one time suppressed by the people who wanted the old calendar, the spring New Year, and nevertheless it triumphed. It came through because the people wanted it. You know, in Iran, over the last 20 years, something very interesting has happened. There's an old Persian New Year festival called Nowruz, which has nothing to do with Islam, which existed among Persians from Zoroastrian times. And most Muslim authorities tried to suppress it. And when the Iranian Revolution came to power, they said it's forbidden, you may not celebrate Nowruz. And they couldn't stop it, the people wanted it. And so they found an Islamic way to justify it. The Catholic Church, when it conquered Mexico, hated the Mexican Festival of the Dead because that was what they saw as evil spirits and so on. Lo and behold, it became a Catholic holiday, All Saints' Day on November 1st. It was integrated. It is certainly Rosh Hashanah shares some of that same fate. There were people among, shall we call them, the ecclesiastical authorities of the Jews who didn't like it, but it came back. It came back because it was a festival the people loved. And the people loved it because this idea of crowning God is a very powerful idea. God is king. But how does God become king? We offer God the crown. We coronate God. And that makes us pretty important too. That makes us pretty powerful figures too. We're the ones who offer the crown to God. Now we have that coronation of God motif in the synagogue every day because we have a prayer called Kiddusha, where if you follow the Sephardic version of it, the old Sephardic version, it says, a crown is given to you, Lord, by the angels above and by us people gathered below. We all together offer you a crown. And the Talmud even argues about this wonderful argument in the Talmud. Only the Talmud could think of such an argument. But how do they get the crown onto God's head? How do the angels get the crown into God's head? Because nobody knows where he is. So it says they recite a mysterious formula over the crown, and the crown flies up and puts itself on the divine head. So you don't have to worry about where the head is. So there are always flying crowns around, you know, the flying crowns, which are sent up by the intense prayers and wishes and dreams of Israel and the angels. So this festival of crowning the king or crowning the ruler, it's in some ways it disappeared and in some ways it survived. It was no longer the act of following the gods with this great procession they had and so on, and the temple rites they had for crowning the gods, but the idea of what do you do when you crown the gods? You make a great noise. We still have it, by the way, in the noisemakers on secular New Year, on January 1st, December 31st. People have noisemakers on New Year's Eve. That's an ancient tradition of making a loud sound to announce that long live the king, long live the king is dead, long live the king. The people shout. And the truah, the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah somehow is historically related to all that. So all that's very nice. But the question is, what do we do with it today? Where do we go with it? What do we do with it? This idea of the coronation of God. When I was as young as some of the younger people in this crowd are, I would say when I was in my 30s, I would rant against the two essential metaphors for God that we had in the Jewish tradition. My bugaboo was the God of what I called Avinu Malkeinu theology, the theology of our Father, our King. And I said, it doesn't make any sense, partly because it was all male, though we were just beginning to become sensitive to that 50 years ago, but partly because neither one worked very well anymore. If God was a projected father figure, we were all Freudians in those days, then you had to kick that father in the shins, and maybe shins is a euphemism, in order to become free, in order to become an adult. So religion would have to go through adolescent rebellion against the father figure. And if God is a king, well, what do you want? What's your model? Great Britain or Saudi Arabia? If God is a king like the Queen is Queen in Great Britain, God has no real power. But once a year on Rosh Hashanah, call it Coronation Day, we dress him up in all this finery, we get those purple robes back from the dry cleaners, and we put him in his carriage and have a parade around Buckingham Palace, and that's what the rule of God is. Or you could take Saudi Arabia, where of course that king has a right to have your head chopped off at any moment for a pretty arbitrary lack of reason. And maybe that's more realistic. Maybe that's what God the King is. More Saudi Arabia than Great Britain. But is that what we want? Can we worship a God like that? So I said, again, back in my 30s, no, it's all got to go. Father and king metaphors all have to go. The royal metaphor just doesn't work anymore. By the way, I had a Canadian friend whom I discussed these things with back then. He said, that's a uniquely American problem because you are a revolutionary society. You overthrew the king. We Canadians didn't. And we don't have that problem with kings that you Americans seem to have. Well, we've had a problem with a recent pretender at kingship in America, so we know it all the more, don't we? But then the truth is, it was after I had a child and my daughter began fantasy play, partly through watching television, but partly through just her own little bits of creativity. And I saw her recreating the medieval world. She wanted pink princesses, and she wanted the princesses to live in castles. And even if the TV show she was watching started on a spaceship, all of a sudden on this other planet, they'd wind up in some medieval castle with little princes and princesses. And having read a little bit of Jung in those days, I said, maybe this is an archetype that we can't simply dismiss so quickly. Maybe tampering with archetypal thinking is something that we should do with more caution. And maybe there's a reason why these images appear in folktales and legends and religions and dreams all around the world. And so I became, I would say, a little bit more modest about my anxiety to make radical changes in the liturgy and make radical changes in how we saw things. But now I want to ask something else. This is a festival of creation. B'tishrei nivra ha'olam. The world was created in Tishrei. What do we mean by the world was created? We don't live in a world anymore where the world is 5,783 years old, Mazel Tov, this year. We live in a world where this planet has been around for 6 or 7 billion years and was a result of a great stellar explosion that happened 13 billion years ago. And we just are beginning to understand the vastness of space and the number of galaxies, the millions of galaxies that are out there, and the number of planets and stars in those galaxies, and their birth and their death, and we are humbled to a degree that's absolutely beyond words, absolutely can't even be stated, by the vastness of this picture in both space and time, and I would say across the space-time continuum. By the way, the Hebrew word olam is a wonderful word because it's a word that goes across the space-time continuum. Sometimes olam le'olam means time, and sometimes ha'olam means space, and you never quite know which you're talking about, or maybe you're talking about both at the same time. And for those of us who know things that exist beyond time and space, but are manifest in both time and space. For the Kabbalists, I'm talking about the Sfirot, but maybe for some of you, I'm talking about something else that is beyond both time and space, but then makes appearance in time and space. That's an important thing to know. So Earth is a result of that great stellar explosion. And everything we have, everything we are, is made up of the results of that explosion. It's the same stardust on Earth, same stardust on the moon, same stardust on a distant galaxy, and everything is made up of that stardust, of that primal stuff that came out of that explosion and cooled and became rock and became soil and became sea and became everything else in the world. The chemicals in our bodies are also made up of that same primal stuff. So I understand that primal stuff is a good word because it's so undefined. That primal energy, shall we call it, because matter is energy. That primal energy is that which has undergone the whole process of survival and transformation for the 6 or 7 billion years of our planet. It's that same primal one that entered into that pool of chemicals out of which life emerged, and then undertook the mantle of evolution. And that same primal one is the one behind the one-celled animals that lived under the sea, and the beginning of the complication of those forms of life. And the animals, the sea animals that eventually had the great courage to step up onto land. We Jews like to praise that guy, Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the first guy to walk into the Red Sea and make it split. But think about the courage of that first creature that came up out of the sea and decided it could live on that other thing over there, the emerging dry land. And how out of those same creatures that came out of the sea, and they all had the same ancestry of those one-celled undersea creatures. Some of those creatures that came up on land developed roots and began to nourish themselves from the soil. And others learned that they could nourish themselves by eating those plants. Pretty amazing stuff. Pretty amazing stuff for it all to have come out of that same single process. One of my big goals in my spiritual life is to try to sacralize the story of creation through evolution, to understand that evolution is a sacred story. That evolution, and when I say evolution, I don't just mean the evolutionary biology, I mean the geology and the astrophysics and everything else that goes with it, that is the great sacred story. You know, we religious people all have our own sacred stories. For us Jews, coming out of Egypt and standing at Sinai is the greatest event in history. All human history revolves around it. And for Christians, of course, it's the resurrection, it's the death and resurrection of Christ. And that indeed has been called the greatest story ever told in those great Hollywood renditions of it. And for Muslims, it's the Hijra, and for Buddhists, it's the enlightenment of the Buddha. Those are the great moments. But I like to say there is a greater story that we all share, and that is the story of how we got here. And we tell that story as a story of evolution. And making that story a sacred drama is the most urgent thing that religions have to do in this century. Because only when that story of evolution becomes a sacred drama will we be motivated to change our behavior and save this planet. Only when we understand that it's all holy, that it's all divine work, that it's all divine presence, that the one is present in each creature, are we going to say, wait, are we going to begin waking up and saying, wait, how do I live in such a world? How do I live in a world of that much holiness and keep it alive? So I'm a believer in that sense, in this holiday of creation and kingship. Creation and kingship, which to me translates into realize the sacred quality of the story of evolution and submit yourself to it. Once you realize it, say, how can I serve? How can I serve? How can I keep that sacred process of evolution moving? Maybe by raising children, kol hakavod, that's a way of serving. Yes, you are passing genes on to the next generation. But maybe it's by cultural transmission. Maybe it's by teaching. I've had that great privilege for a long time. Maybe it's by passing on a religious language, a spiritual language, passing on a tradition, passing on and changing. I like to say that Rosh Hashanah, the word Shana in Hebrew means both repeating and transforming. Yes, lishnot is to say over and over and over again, Shana, like a Mishnah, something you recite over and over. But lishanot, shinui, the same verb, can also mean to change. So Rosh Hashanah is the beginning point of, well, you decide. Is it going to be a repeat of last year? Or is it going to be a change? Or is it going to be both? So I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that message in the way it has to be transformed. And then I want to say also that that this is about rebirth, birth and rebirth. The spring New Year, the old calendar, is obviously about birth. We see buds in the spring. We see things being born in the spring. The fall New Year, which we chose, is about rebirth. It's all going to go to sleep for the winter. Though we have a faith that it's going to stay alive. And then it's going to be reborn next year. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is. It's a statement of, yes, Jews can be born again. To pick up language of the evangelicals. You can be born again. Yes. That's why, look at the Torah readings for Yamim Noraim, for these high holidays. We begin with birth. Yes, we begin with the birth of Isaac, the first birth in the tribe. And we end with Jonah, which is a rebirth tale. When the whale spits Jonah up onto the dry land, that's a rebirth. That's a moment of rebirth. And then Jonah, what does Jonah want? Jonah's really ticked off at God. He says, Rebbeinu Shalom, Lord of the universe, you're a sucker. You're going to see these people dressing in sackcloth and ashes, and you're going to say, oh, they've changed, they've repented, I'm going to forgive them. And they're not going to change. It's all bullshit. They're all lying to you. And don't you know better? And God has to say to Jonah, listen, fella, I made them. I know them better than you do. I believe they can change. And Jonah's cynicism is what has to be overcome. And our cynicism about our ability to change has to be overcome. And that's why it's the last text we read on the high holidays. That's why it concludes. It goes from birth. We go from birth to rebirth, because the message of Yamim Noraim, of these high holidays, is yes, you can be born again. You really can change, even though you may not think so. I know you better than you do, and I'm telling you, you can. And so that's a big piece of what this is about. So creation, birth, evolution, kingship, rebirth. They sort of all come together in this pastiche of motifs. Now, what I want to do now, as I sip my tea, is give you a breather. We're going to take about 10 minutes for questions, comments, and then we're going to read a Hasidic text. A text, one of the texts that inspires me and that shows me how much of these ideas the Hasidic masters knew 200 years ago and how I reread it. But before we go to the text, we're going to take a little bit of I suggest a stretch, something like that, and think about what you want to ask, or what you disagreed with, or what you want to hear more about from what I said over the past half hour, and put it in the chat. And Ami's going to pick some questions and ask them of me. And then after 10, 12 minutes, something like that, we'll come back and do a text. L'chaim.
Okay, l'chaim. So as Rabbi Green said, please feel free to drop any questions that have arisen for you here, thoughts, curiosities. Holy debate, the art of machloket is primal art in the Jewish tradition. Feel free to drop it in the chat room here, and we'll send along some of the questions to Rabbi Green.
And while you do that, I'll say hello to various old friends I see on the screen. It's very nice to see you all. So new people, it's great to meet, but people I've known for years and years, very especially nice to see you.
So Rabbi Green, can you hear me?
I can indeed. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is Ami, and as I'm waiting for people to drop some questions in, I have something I would be curious for you to give a little more of a finer point on. You mentioned your hangups about God as King back in your 30s, and recognition of the importance that we play in relation to a king. And I'm just curious how you see that in terms of the sanctifying evolution that you've spoken to, seeing the broad scope of things. Where do you see our role there? How does God as king seem to make more sense to you, and our relationship to that idea? I would love if you could just speak out a little more.
Yes,
of that.
I guess what I keep of royalty, Ami, is the sense of submission, is the sense that we are tiny players in this game that's so much more vast than we are. Each of us is given the privilege of appearing on the stage for about a hundredth of a second in evolutionary time. And I say that, that's because the one that underlies it all chose to enter into this being called Ami Silver, chose to enter into this being called Art Green and hang around for a while in that form, and for a very short while, and then we'll go on to another form. And it seems to love all those forms. I say all of that is an act of love. And that's what I mean by God loves us. That the one chooses to enter into this particular form called you or you or you or me because it wants to. Because it loves variety, it loves complexity. The evolutionary process shows that there's a love of multiplicity and variety and complexity. And so all of us are products of that, and are part of that, and we submit to that. It's bigger, it's so much bigger than we are. So that's what I call the Malchut Shamayim, divine kingship or divine rule. It is so much bigger than we are, and we are part of it. And yes, we can rebel along the way. We can say no, but ultimately, it is just recognizing the magnitude of it and the smallness of ourselves is what puts me back into place and say, okay, maybe kingship is a pretty good metaphor for that, and maybe I shouldn't be in a rush to change it or dispose of it.
Thank you for that. There's one more question that's come through here. This is from Raj. Raj is asking, can you speak to the difference and possibility of individual and community change? The difference and possibility of individual and communal change.
Yes. When I say the possibility of change, I'm talking on so many levels. I tend to be a person who cares a lot about the individual inner spiritual life. That's just who I am, the way I'm built. I've been that way for a long time and probably won't change. Some people say, yes, communal change has to begin with individual. You have to change individuals first. I'm not convinced that that's universally true. It's where I do much of my work. But I believe in communal change. I believe in economic change. I believe in social status change. I think that the spiritual revolution is part of the big revolution, which is when I have been an old revolutionary since 1968 or before, and I still somehow am in that revolutionary transformative mode. That yes, we need to change society because of its injustice and because of its victimization, and because so many of us have been marginalized, and because the present social structures have caused such vast amounts of pain around all kinds of dividing lines. I don't need to list here because somebody will jump on me if I miss one, so I won't list any. But I believe in all that. I believe in all the need for all that level of change. But I also believe in the possibility of the rebirth of the spiritual life, and I think that's an essential part of it. And my bias is, and I admit it as a bias, my bias is that we have to begin with the transformation of ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for that. A few more questions coming through here. This is from, I don't know if it's pronounced Eli or Eli. What happens if we're not ready to really crown God and give God that authority? Where does that leave us with or toward or in relation to the tradition?
Wonderful question. and one that I have, that's been in my heart for a very long time. Giving authority, giving up authority. I believe each of us has responsibility for his, her own spiritual life, and that the authority is with us. I don't submit it to a committee of rabbis. I don't submit it to a book called The Set Table. I just have not been willing to submit it. And that's why my relationship to traditional Judaism has always been a complex one. I'm somewhere between a chassid and a pikaris. I daven in the very traditional minyan here, and some sort of smart-ass lawyer type from the local modern Orthodox shul who showed up there he said, somebody told me that Hasidism and modern Orthodoxy are completely incompatible because modern Orthodoxy is rational and Hasidism isn't. And would you tell me what you think about that? And I told him, well, I never go near modern Orthodoxy because I'm both a chassid and a pikaris. I'm both a chassid and a heretic. And so I can't call myself modern Orthodox. Neither part of me would be happy there. And so giving up authority is something I understand the difficulty in doing. And I don't mean giving up authority over the way I conduct my own life. I believe I maintain that authority, even though I want to be guided by tradition. I want to find out what prior generations did. I want to learn from other people. I feel I retain responsibility there, for better and worse. I pay the price. But submitting to the magnitude of what I'm calling the divine kingdom here, submitting to the magnitude of existence and calling that my king is what I'm really talking about. Many years ago, I had a Catholic priest friend who said to me, you have to understand, to me, there's a big difference between submitting to Jesus Christ and submitting to my bishop. And that's a Christian translation of what I'm saying.
Thank you for that. And another question that seems to line up with perhaps what your response to the modern orthodoxy question. Todd asks here, do you feel that capitalism, or at least the current version, is fundamentally in opposition to the spiritual reawakening you're discussing? And I would be curious of, how, just to expand that question, the magnitude of creation and it is being expressed in how we are in all of this manifestation.
So I want to go back, to answer that question, I want to go back to evolution and say, when I deal with a problem with evil, which of course every religious person has to deal with, I take it back to evolutionary terms. If I have a question of the one that lies behind all, it is this: why did evolution have to be such a violent process? Why did it have to be dog eat dog and species eat species, and the world divided between predators and prey? And when I see capitalism, I see those two elk bucking horns in the woods, fighting over territory, or fighting over the female. And the aggressive capitalism feels like it's that piece of our evolutionary legacy that we're stuck with. We're still bucking horns with the other deer to try to knock those antlers down. And I ask, why did it have to be that way? But then I say, evolution also tells us that we humans are not only like those proto deer or proto elk, let's say, but we're also like ants and bees. We could never have gotten anything had we not learned to cooperate with one another. We could never have gotten anywhere had we not created societies that are collaborative and we work together. So the question then becomes, what do we want to learn from our evolutionary legacy? Which way do we want to go? Is capitalism the bucking horns in the woods, and socialism the learning from ants and bees? Socialism has been so badly discredited by the communist experiment of the 20th century that it's very hard to have much faith in it. But for me, capitalism has to be very, very controlled, much more controlled than Americans are willing to do. So I'm somewhere in between on the question of capitalism, socialism. I tend to be a left-wing Democrat. I tend to be a left-wing, let's be very careful about the abuses of capitalism. But I'm not willing to throw my eggs in the socialist basket because I've seen how much that can fail. I think we ought to go back to text now, okay?
Sure.
If we have time for another question or two at the end, maybe we'll add them on, but
Okay,
I want to have time
great.
for the text. So now we're going to turn to a Hasidic text and ask ourselves, how was something like this said 200 years ago by one of my very favorite of the early Hasidic masters, the More Naim, the light of the eyes. The More Naim, who died in 1797, just to give you an idea, the book was published a year later, 1798, in a shtetl in Eastern Europe that you've heard of. He was the Rebbe of the town called Chernobyl. And Chernobyl among Jews was known for a different kind of light long before it was known for the terrible light of the Chernobyl accident. He's the Chernobyl Rebbe. He was the second generation of disciples. He was a disciple of both the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich. But I love him because he, more than anybody else, remained faithful to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. And so I translated his big book into English last year. You can get it from Stanford University Press, The Light of the Eyes. And this is actually a teaching that's not in there because it's from his teachings, not on the Torah. That's part of the book I didn't translate. So I'm reading it from my book, The Speaking Torah, some of you may know, which is a selection of favorite Hasidic sources on each week's Parsha and on the holidays. So, Ami, you want to put it on the screen? So we're going to look at both the Hebrew and the English, because there are not a few of you here who can understand the Hebrew as well. So I don't want to ignore the original. Yes, but let's give us the English on the screen. I think I'll read from the Hebrew, but let's give us the English on the screen, yes. So we're starting with a verse in Jeremiah, which we won't get to for a while. Mirachok Hashem nirali, from afar, Havaya appears to me. Ahavat olam ahavtich, I've loved you with an eternal love. Al kein mishachtich chesed, beautiful, beautiful Hebrew. I have loved you with eternal love, therefore I have drawn grace upon you. Our sages said, from the Talmud, B'tishrei nivra ha'olam, the world was created in Tishrei. Notice they didn't say, in Tishrei God created the world, B'tishrei barat ha'olam, ela b'tishrei nivra ha'olam. Why did they use the passive instead of the active? Because the passive, you don't know if it's past tense or present tense. B'tishrei nivra ha'olam can be translated, in Tishrei the world was created, or in Tishrei the world is created. In the active, you have to distinguish past, you have past from present. But in the passive, you don't. So B'tishrei nivra ha'olam means every Rosh Hashanah the world is created. The process of creation was not a one-time event. It did not happen at the beginning of time, but it's a process that happens constantly. But of course, for us evolution believers, of course it happens constantly. We know the process of creation is still going on. Every new generation, every new species that comes forth is the ongoing creation. And that's only on our little planet, but think about the creation going on in all those galaxies and all those worlds. Of course, the creation process, the evolution of existence is constantly happening. So b'tishrei nivra ha'olam, it's a constant process. The Blessed Holy One created the world in such a way that there remained something to do. Asher bara Elohim la'asot. It says in Genesis 2:3. We say that in Kiddush every Friday night. Asher bara Elohim la'asot. God created the world to do, as though the doing is not over. And he placed this in the hands of Israel, their actions having an impact above. As soon as he says in the hands of Israel, I have to universalize it and say in human hands. That's I sort of do an automatic pilot. Remember, these people were writing only for Jews. They couldn't imagine non-Jews being part of this. And that's, thank God, we live in a broader, more open universe. So I automatically universalize as did Buber and Seiflin and Heschel and many before me who reread these texts. If they are unworthy, if humans are unworthy, the world deserves to return to its original chaos. If people can't do it, yachzor ha'olam l'tov vavohu, because it's in our hands. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment. What happens on Rosh Hashanah? Everyone shakes in fear and returns to God. I want to read the Hebrew here. ולפי שבראש השנה יום הדין, כולם רועדים ופוחדים ושבים אל השם, וחוזרים כל אחד לשורשם. Well, it used to be that way, at least. People used to be terrified of Rosh Hashanah. Yes. People who believed literally, and God is writing, sealing your fate. That was a very dreadful thing. And so there was a Rosh Hashanah of a lot of fear. There was a Rosh Hashanah that was indeed about that. But I want to say something else. Years and years ago, I had a wonderful conversation with an old friend whose name will be known to some of you, named Larry Kushner. And we were talking about the situation of American Jews, American Judaism. And Larry said, Jewish life is built around two cycles, the year cycle and the life cycle. The year cycle is in terrible trouble. Try to get a minyan on the second day of Shavuot. Yes, people don't even come to shul for Yizkor anymore. Try to tell people what Shmini Atzeret is. The year cycle is in grave decline among American Jews, but the life cycle among those same Jews is alive and well. They still want to have some kind of ceremony for their baby born, boy or girl. Maybe they want to circumcise, maybe they don't, but even if they don't want to circumcise, they want a naming. And they want a Jewish wedding, even if they're marrying non-Jews. They want a chuppah, they want a ketubah, they want something Jewish about it. Certainly at the end of life, they want something Jewish. And b'nei mitzvah, b'not mitzvah, all of that, people want their life cycles alive. And I said to him, well, what about Yamim Noraim? How come shuls fill up on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And we looked at each other, we both said, oh, of course. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur isn't about year cycle, it's about life cycle. These are life cycle events. You walk in for a few minutes, you say, hey, whoever you are, I don't know why I'm still alive, but thanks, see you next year. That's essentially the real prayer of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I once heard Rabbi Soloveitchik say to a group of elderly immigrants speaking in Yiddish, he said, the real meaning of Yom Kippur for me is in the Shechiyanu after Kol Nidre. And you understand this, but my Talmidim, my students don't understand this. And he was saying exactly the same thing. The real power of it is, yes, I'm still alive, thank you. It's another year. That's the most important thing, and the rest in a certain way is commentary on that. So it's not just year cycle, this is life cycle. And so that's why people tremble on Rosh Hashanah, because there is something about life and death about it. But then he says, what happens? This is very interesting. So people return to God, and everyone returns to their root, and that awakens the compassion of the Creator, and the world is recreated. Because of the fear of judgment, people return to God, awakening mercy, and that recreates the world. The word Tishrei represents the returning of light to God. In Jewish mysticism, there's something called Or Yashar and Or Choser. Or Yashar is the light God sends into the world, and Or Choser is the light we send back into the one. The divine is always breathing light into us, and we are breathing that breath of light, breath of life, breath of light back into the divine one. Kol neshama tehallel, every breath praises, sends the light back to its source. He says the word Tishrei represents the returning of light to God, since the first three letters are the end of the alphabet. Taf Shin Resh is Aleph Bet Gimel from the other end. Yes, it's the backwards alphabet, and that means it's about returning the light, and that's why in Nisan the world is created straight. In Tishrei the world is created back from the end. We, who are the end product of creation, are sending the light back up. The word Tishrei represents the returning of the light, first three letters, the end of the alphabet, the return of all things, the power of judgment and limitation. Since this brings about creation, Judgment itself is really the ultimate compassion. What brings about creation? Everybody trembling about Rosh Hashanah, and that somehow awakens mercy. Everybody wants to return to God, and that awakens mercy. Well, is that very anthropomorphic, more anthropomorphic than you can take? Maybe let's say it awakens mercy in us. The sense of mortality. Now I'm translating from 18th century language to 21st century language. The sense of mortality that we have awakens in us compassion for others, for other mortal beings, other human beings, animals, plants. The sense of mortality awakens mercy in others. And that awakening of mercy in us arouses the cosmic force of mercy. That awakening of mercy in us somehow transcends us and awakens a cosmic force of mercy. And that recreates the world, that renews existence. That cosmic force of mercy sends the light back to us, sends the energy back into us. I'm really not talking about vertical metaphor, a God out there beyond us. I'm talking about deep inner forces within us, that our mind is connected to the one through the collective unconscious, through myth and symbol, and we turn deep within and we open our hearts with that compassion, and it arouses some mysterious cosmic force within us that gives us new birth. That's really my translation. And therefore, since it brings about creation, judgment itself is really the ultimate compassion. That which scared us about Rosh Hashanah, that awareness of mortality, is in fact a gift because it awakened those forces of compassion and recreation. And that's what it means when the prophet says, Merachok Hashem nirali, from afar, from the afar of judgment, where God appears far off, and therefore I'm afraid, and I recognize my limits and my mortality, the aspect of mercy is revealed. That mercy was at first hidden. That mercy was at first hidden, but now it comes to be revealed. That is why we say, Hayom Harat Olam. Hayom Harat Olam, it's usually translated in the prayer book for Rosh Hashanah, this day the world was born, but it really means this day the world was conceived. And I want to read the Hebrew, because this is fairly rare to have that. Tchila hayta harachamim gnuza be'elem, ואחר כך נתגלתה הרחמנות בפועל. לכן נקרא היום הרת עולם, שבחינת הריון, שהרחמנות הייתה בהיעלם גנוז, כמו עובר בהיריון. Because mercy was hidden away like an unborn child in the womb. So this rebirth process, he really identifies with motherhood here, with God as a mother. We are really being reborn out of the divine womb. It was like a pregnancy. Mercy was hidden. The potential for rebirth was hidden, like an unborn child in the womb. Now the sound of the shofar awakens it, bring it into a revealed state. Remember, Maimonides said about the shofar, Uru, wake up. The shofar is a wake-up call. And God knows we need wake-up calls in this world in which we live. So the shofar is a wake-up call. The shofar and the sound of the shofar awakens that unborn child in us, waiting to be reborn, bringing it into a revealed state. And that's why we say in the Talmud that the patriarchs were born in Tishrei. The compassion that they represent was in a latent state and now was born into reality. And that is why we say B'Tishrei nivra ha'olam, that the world is created in Tishrei because it's ever being made anew. And just the conclusion of it in Hebrew. רוצה לומר הרחמנות שיהיו בבחינת הריון ועתה נולדו בהתגלות. וכן בתשרי נברא העולם שתמיד הוא כן, התחדשות הבריאה. התחדשות הבריאה, the renewal of creation. That reflexive verb of chadash is a very nice usage in Hebrew. Hitchadshut habriah, that creation renews itself. The creation is constantly reborn. So I hope you hear him. Let's go back to seeing each other. I hope you hear him saying in 18th century some of the things I'm trying to say in 21st century. Yes, his assumptions are very different. He does believe the world was only created 5,600 years ago, Chris, or 5,500 something years ago, and he is a literal believer in the Torah narrative of creation and so on. And I'm quite far from being a literalist about any of those things. But I have been inspired by reading these guys, and as I say, I think they do translate into a language that we can learn to speak today and learn to share with others. Now our plan is to give you a different kind of break. Ami is going to help set you up in little groups. Is that right? In small groups to talk to one another about this, and see what you think, and get to share some conversation with one another. And Ami, you know how to do that. I don't. And then we're going to come back for about 15 minutes at the end for more questions and tying together. So Ami, I turn it over to you and see how you want to do the breakout groups.
Okay, so I will create breakout rooms here. I just want to let people know this is an opportunity for you to both share some of what's been touched in you through these teachings, share that with some of the other people here, chance to have some of that commingling. And I also want to let you know that it is optional. If you enter into a breakout room and you don't want to share, you don't have to share. And B, you have an option to not even enter into a breakout room. I believe the invitation will come up on your screen and you have an option to decline. Regardless of whether you
sandwich, if that's what you do instead.
Exactly. Go to the coffee corner. It's Kiddush time. You know, at Kiddush we talk, at Kiddush we eat. So I will put us into breakout rooms. We'll give 10 minutes right now to discussion, and then we'll be able to come back from the small groups into the larger group. And I just want to I'll say here, and I also will share in text in the chat boxes in each room, just some basic guiding questions here for what you might want to discuss here. First and foremost, what's something that either touched you here or that stirred your curiosity from listening to Rabbi Green's teaching, from perhaps the text of the Mori 9 that we learned together, or from Rabbi Green's interpretation of it? Something touched me, something I'm curious about, something I'm grappling with, perhaps even something I'm bothered by. And I'll add here as well, alternatively, was there anything here that was not mentioned that was evoked for you from encountering this text and these ideas? Aspects of this teaching that perhaps wasn't given much of a spotlight, but that you feel, hey, this is where what it really awakens in me. Okay, so again, we'll have about 10 minutes together, brief sharing, and a chance to just have some of that cross-pollination. So just a moment here. I'll just wait a few more moments as last breakout rooms are closing. Okay. All right, everyone should be back from their breakout rooms. Some of you were technologically yanked out, hopefully meaning you were deep in engagement and connecting with one another. So we have about 15 minutes left here in our session. It's an opportunity for either questions that weren't addressed earlier. You can drop them back in the chat here, and I'm sure new questions and thoughts have emerged after having a chance to chew it over a little more together. So please share what's on your mind in the chat here, and Rabbi Green will be able to respond.
I mean, I'd like to start by my dive into the chat. While you were busy in your breakout groups, I read through the chat. And so I want to enter into this conversation that Ben and others were involved in. And I want to say that I don't feel I have a sure triumphal answer to this question of can we still use royal language. I do. It still speaks to me. It somehow works as a heart opener for me, but that's the way it's supposed to work, as a heart opener. And if it doesn't work as a heart opener for you, I think you should try to feel free to let go of it and use something else as a heart opener for this transformation, rebirth effort that's the real meaning of Rosh Hashanah. I've been involved in this question for a very long time. When I was universal spirit, we were addressing universal spirit, and that's much better than addressing universal ruler. And then somebody in the group said, well, wait a minute. If there are 6 words of Hebrew that American Jewish kids still know, it's those 6 words, Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam. Do you really want to mess with them and make our kids different that way and not have them know the same thing? So if you look in the prayer book of the Reconstructionist movement called Kol HaNeshama, and you look at the morning blessings, Birchot HaShachar, they alternate, Melech HaOlam, Ruach HaOlam, Melech HaOlam, because they couldn't quite decide what to do about it. And that says something about, that alternating says something about what I feel and what I think is our Jewish situation. We are heirs to a very ancient tradition, and it's very badly. Very hard to tamper with it, and it needs transformation badly. On some things, on the feminist issue, we've been willing to tamper more, some very much, some not so much, but it's the issue of tampering has come out because of the feminist challenge. But there are other things too that are not just about gender, that very much need to be changed, and yet it's very hard to let go of. As I've gotten older, and this may be the natural conservatism of older people, and I shouldn't be proud of it, but I'll tell you anyway, as I've gotten older, the antiquity of the language itself has become more and more important to me. And I feel that this familiar language has an echo chamber of eternity about it. Because it's been said for so many years, I know it was invented. I know at some point it was new. But I feel that echo chamber of generations saying it. And I feel that echo is diminished with every change I make. And therefore I have become, while theologically ever more radical, liturgically quite a bit more traditional. My commentary in the prayer book is a bridge between that, across that vast gap between what my own theology is about and what the book says. But I find the power of the old language very persuasive to me. But that's a purely personal comment. I never say, therefore you must, or therefore it has to be that way. Go ahead, Ami, take it away.
Yeah, thank you for that. A few comments here have been asking, and I'll just kind of try to combine them. Moshe asks, the psychedelic experience is in the background of this rich discussion. Is there anything that needs to be said to bring it into the foreground? Or Kim asking how to contextualize the psychedelic perspective in relation to the potency of the season. Curious, Rabbi Green, where you go with any or either of those questions.
Yes. The potency of the season is a very nice way of saying it. And the potency of the psychedelic seasoning has some parallel to that and has something to do with that. And we shouldn't run away from it. I want to say that I was deeply involved in this language prior to psychedelics, and my encounter with psychedelics enriched it for me and made me more sure than ever that there was something alive and something real here, because so much of psychedelic experience corresponded to things that I had seen in the Hasidic texts and to things that I had experienced myself already. In those years, I'm now talking about the late 1960s, Zalman and I were the only two people anybody knew who shared both Hasidism and psychedelics. And so there was very much a very intimate sharing between us about the parallel insights. But yes, I think bringing it to the fore is good and not hiding. This is a season to go to a higher place, which I always translate as a deeper place. Let me say that my essential theological move is to take vertical language and transform it into internal language. God is not up there, but in there. We are not talking about someone who exists on the other side of the heavens, but we're talking about someone, a reality, a being, a oneness, a truth that resides deep within the soul and deep within all reality. Now, the difference between the vertical metaphor and the internal metaphor is in the vertical metaphor, you need to do what Jacob did, find a ladder and climb all the way up to heaven. In the internal metaphor, you don't need a ladder, you need a hammer to break through the wall. It's right there, it's right there. But you've built a wall around it, that's called defenses. We have built defenses against that inner presence within us. And how do we break on through to the other side? How do we smash that wall? How do we get to that part of ourselves? Or how do we get to that of which we are a part? Since I don't think it's just a part of ourselves, I think we are the part and it is the whole. So then it's a question of doing that inner work. So yes, Rosh Hashanah is about doing inner work. Shall I tell you that when I used to be on the lecture circuit a lot. I've gotten too old for synagogue scholar in residence gigs. I've stopped it. But when I gave my introductory lecture to Hasidism, I said the Hasidic movement never defined itself because it existed from within and people knew what it was. But I said I found 2 3-word definitions within the Hasidic sources that were useful. And this goes directly to the psychedelic. In a letter written from one Chabad Hasid to another, turn of the early 19th century, he asks, it's the Rabbi of Hummel and the Rabbi of Bobroisk, I think, if you want the details. And Louis Jacobs has translated that letter somewhere. He says, why are the opponents of Hasidism so angry with us? What don't they get? Why do they think we're all wrong? And he says, well, they don't understand. He's writing in Hebrew. He says, they don't understand the great secret that all of us Hasidim understand. And then he switches to Yiddish suddenly, as alles is Gott, that everything is God. And this insight that everything is God is the basis of Hasidism. And when it came to the first Hasidim, they went wild with it. And only our master has told us how to keep it under control. But being a Hasid means to know that alles is Gott, all is God. And then I found another source from the Kotzker Rebbe, who lived maybe 50 years later, a very different kind of Hasidism. And somebody asked him, what does it mean to be a Hasid? And he said, arbeiten auf sich, to work on yourself. Arbeiten auf sich, to work on yourself. So I take those 2 3-word definitions. Alles is Gott, arbeiten auf sich. All is God, work on yourself. Work on yourself, all is God. If you just said all is God, it would come out a little bit like tune in, turn on, drop out. Hey, it's all God. Let's just space out on it. That's all we need to do is space out on it. There's nothing we need to do. We just are, and we space out of it, and that's all is God. And we wouldn't get anywhere. We wouldn't make the world a better place in any way. Wouldn't make ourselves better people in any way. We'd just be blissed out. And blissed out is wonderful, and I recommend it, but it's not the ultimate that we need. And so then there's work on yourself. If we just had work on yourself without all is God, it would be too depressing. All you got to do is work on yourself. Do you ever get there? So therefore, you have them in your two hands or your two pockets if you want that. All is God, work on yourself, all is God. And that's a good message for Rosh Hashanah. You know, remember that it's all God. And that's what it's all about. It's all the one. If you I don't like that God word very much in English, but I like Yud He Vav He much better than God. I really think God is distorting it. It's too much like the fellow on the throne. I try to avoid it when I can. But all is one, and yet you got to work on yourself and open yourself up to it. So that's that's sort of where I am about the psychedelic content of what this event is about.
Thank you so much for that. And just if we might have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Or response
usually I
here.
give long answers.
Anything else that is stirring? Maybe somebody who has had something in their mind and hasn't felt ready to ask or share. You have an opportunity.
Yeah, Eli or Ellie is asking something. Has a hand up, I see. Go ahead.
If that was me, I was just stretching. Apologies.
Oh, you were just stretching. Okay. All right. Then let's call it a day, and hope you have a wonderful Chag, wonderful holiday, and lots of good renewal and lots of good rebirth. And it's been a pleasure being with you.
So just before we say goodbye, hold on, I'll just come on here. Before we say goodbye, first and foremost, just Hakarat Tov to you, Rabbi Green. Thank you so much for your teaching, for your partnership and launching us into Elul. I feel like the summary you gave of all is God, work on yourself as what it means to be a chassid epitomized all of the teaching that you shared here, and really brought us into that space of what Rosh Hashanah is calling us toward. I'd like to ask you, Rabbi Green, is there anything you have up and coming that you'd like our community to know about? We mentioned your commentary on the Siddur. Are there other opportunities or other things that people should be on the lookout for?
Commentary on the Siddur will be published by Institute for Jewish Spirituality at Hebrew College. Sometime this winter. Look for it. You have to order it. You can order it through. You'll be able to order it through Amazon, etc. And yes, I'm teaching. I'm offering a weekly class beginning after the holidays, beginning after Simchat Torah, which means in late October. We're going to look at the weekly parasha and going to take one classic Hasidic source and then one text on the parsha that I wrote myself, because I've been writing my own Divrei Torah on the weekly Torah portion. And you can find that at my website, artgreen26.com. Artgreen26, 26 is a holy Jewish number. Artgreen26.com. It will say learning opportunities there, and that's the best way to find it. So, love and blessings to one and all.
Wonderful. And I'll just add for all of our participants, thank you for joining us here. Thank you for making this Beit Midrash, this house of seeking, a living, breathing entity. I want to invite you all to continue learning with us for each of the next 3 Sundays. We'll have a different teacher each week leading up to Rosh Hashanah. I'm dropping Shefa's website into the chat here. If you haven't signed up, you can look there and find out more about our offerings. If you enjoyed this, feel free to invite more friends to join. And if you feel so moved, you are welcome to also donate, contribute so that others with lesser means can be participating in upcoming opportunities and in general to support our work. Very grateful to everybody here, especially to you, Rabbi Green, and to all who've come to learn and be here together with us today.
Shalom, shalom.
Take care, everybody. Shana Tova.